Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Dakota, a YouTube channel that's designed to take a comprehensive look at the various facets of narcissism from different psychoanalytic perspectives. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. The title of today's video is The Trauma Bond, Breaking the Addictive Cycle. Now, this is a continuation of my prior video, and usually I do quite a bit of review, but I'm hoping that you did look at that first video, the first episode of this part. Let's call it like a multiple part series. I encourage you to go back and look at it. I'm not going to do a ton of review here. Look at the other episodes. I want to just jump right in and pick up where we left off. I'll get you oriented a little bit just in case you didn't have time to look at those videos. But in short, what we were doing is I found a case online, a trauma bonded individual, a fellow who is in a trauma bonded relationship. He's trying to exit this relationship and he turns to an online professional who claims to be an expert. She has no real credentials in this field, but she's an expert, and she is talking about sort of her techniques and tools in terms of helping somebody get out of this really difficult situation. And what I'm doing is I'm specifically reading his words and then her words, and I'm critiquing it, and I'm giving suggestions in terms of what I find to be far more effective. And it's not just that I found it to be far more effective in my practice, by the way. What I'm suggesting is backed up by empirical research and theoretical research and many case studies. So these are the tools that are well validated. If you're getting the tools, or like in this case, you'll hear them, the more supportive tools where someone is just blaming the other person who's hooking you back in, these tools are not well validated, and that explains why many of these individuals stay stuck in these relationships, because if you're not actually getting the correct tools, how are you ever going to get out of this? How are you going to grow and understand these relationships in a different way? But anyway, enough about that. Let's get right back into the case. So we left off talking about this fellow who's trying to get out of this relationship, and we got right up to the point where he says, but by the way, this is iterative. This has happened before, but it's like, here it is again. It happened before, and I was emphasizing that he sent her this message, and he said, "You look great, please no contact." And that's exactly where we left off, which is the expert's advice was something like, this woman is a vampire, you need to block her. And my opinion was, he's in conflict, right? He sends her a message saying, "You look good, but please no contact." And that's what we call intra-psychic conflict in my field. And we need to analyze his sort of ambivalent feelings. And we want to bring the conflict to the fore and really make it front and center. Because as I mentioned in the prior video, conflict is good. It is that which promotes growth. Okay. So now he says, I broke off the relationship, right? I blocked. And her response, again, the expert says, "Good job, good job. This is my critique. Why not check in with him? Why not see how he's doing? Why not ask, how is it going? What's it like without her? What's been your experience? Can you tell me all about it?" See, this is getting closer to it. I want to do this for many different reasons, but one reason is I want to know what he's experiencing, because oftentimes when people get out of these relationships, they get back in. Why did they get back in? This goes back to the theory that I said. There are many different reasons depending on the theory to which you subscribe, but one reason is there's an inner feeling of boredom. They seek the chaos. They don't want it, but they seek it, and they can't get away from it because it's too painful. They miss it. And they don't know how to mourn. They don't know how to give up these relationships. Instead, they become depressed. So that's why I don't want to just say good job. I want to say, okay, what's it like? Because I want to listen now very closely to see how he's actually coping. And then I will help him. If it's pathological mourning, that's the analytic work now, so that he could really get beyond and not go back to this relationship. Okay. So she says, good job. And my other piece is, now it's really important to strike when the iron is cold. In other words, things are not hot. He's not in this relationship. So it's at this moment that I will begin to talk to him about his appeal for the alluring object. See, because he's not in it now, so he could hopefully step back and begin, and I'll help him with this because he has very little self-reflective capacity. So I'll help him with that, but I want to look at what's the appeal? Why is it so tempting to be with this woman who you perceive as so rejecting and so hurtful? So this is the pursuit of the frustrating, rejecting other. That's what I want to get into. I want to get into his need for chaos, his need for stimulation, so that as we can work through this, there's less of a pull for him to go back into this kind of relationship. Okay, now, as we get closer to this, I'm mentioning I want to get into these things, but here's the most important point. When I check in with him and I say, how are you doing? What's it like? What's your experience? I don't know what's going to come up. This is the unknown. And this is part of being really close to somebody, is you have to have a capacity to not know and to be open to hearing whatever might begin to emerge. So who knows what the motivations are? I'm just basing it on my own experience and on what I understand in terms of looking at the literature, not the online literature, the psychoanalytic literature, what we discover in cases like this, what I've discovered in my own practice. But we have to be open and receptive to whatever might emerge. You will never get there if you just simply say, yes, good for you, good job. That cuts off the possibility of anything else emerging. So what happens now with this fellow? A couple months later, he separates from her, right? And he says, I sent her a letter. And the expert says, oops, you had a relapse. This happens to all of us sometimes, right? You went back to this toxic, abusive person. So here's my critique. Once again, what do you hear? You must hear this by now, right? Because you heard me say this earlier. Where is her focus? Where is most of the focus when you look at these online examples? On the other person. It's like you're there to get help. Why are we focusing on her? Who cares if she's a toxic, abusive person? Yes, I understand some reality checking is helpful, right? We want to test reality. Some of that is valuable. But to solely focus on that is to rob this fellow of an opportunity to really understand, why did he go back? What was going on? Now, let me say, perhaps he's hooking her back. Perhaps he's the one doing the hoovering. And when we begin to look at it like this, and by the way, this is what I would do with somebody who told me this, is I would begin to look at, like, not using these words, what gave him the right to go back and send her a letter when she was maybe trying to figure out and live her own life separate from him. In other words, he's intruding on her. Maybe he's the manipulative narcissist. Oh, we don't like to think about it that way though, because this woman says to him, well, look what she says, no, what she says is, oops, we all make a mistake. You're good. Wait a minute, telling him he's good doesn't give him now the opportunity to explore that maybe he's not good. Maybe he's angry, and maybe he's acting in a hostile way. All of that gets shut off. And by the way, listening to this, I do tend to think that this is quite a hostile act. This woman was living her own life and separating from him, and he went and intruded on this by sending her a letter. I in fact think that he's hooking her back in, and that's what becomes the focus of the work at this period. Okay, let me press on. Let's take a deep breath. We don't want to get too excited, but let me just say before I press on, in earlier videos you may have heard me say, you need to appreciate the subjectively useful component of a maladaptive symptom. This is it perfectly. This is the perfect example. In short, what I've been trying to say is, you need to get close to these people in your life. If this is you, and you're someone who has a hard time getting out of these relationships, you need to get close to, guess who? You. And these things that I'm saying right now are things that I'm hoping you begin to consider. Now, on the other hand, if you have a loved one who's in and out of this kind of relationship, these are the sort of tools, right? The tool is allow yourself to get close to it. Getting close to somebody's hostility and anger is not easy. It's much easier to say, oops, you made a mistake. You're good. We all do this. But what is that? I mean, that's something like maybe a good friend wouldn't even speak to you that way. A good friend may be like, what the hell are you doing? Like, what are you thinking? But a good friend may say, oops, okay, you're a good person. I'm sorry you did this. And then they bash the other person and it becomes all about them. So let's keep going. But this is what it means anyway, to really get close to somebody's experience and appreciate it subjectively, their experience, not run away from it, because these things are not easy to get close to, by the way. So he says to her, she's sending me these messages, and you don't know how badly I want to respond. The expert says, you're having a romance with an idea, right? You're in love. In other words, she says to him, you're in love with a fantasy. And you may have had a good moment with this woman, and now you want to recapture that. All of that is true. All of that is true. But in a way, at this moment, again, it's like another lecture. Now, if it came along with all the other things I was suggesting, that's fine. Like I said, psychoeducation is okay every now and then. So she goes on and she says, but this makes you angry. Now, my feedback on that is, finally, she's getting into the anger. She recognized it herself. But here, again, I quote, I just want to read this. So she touches on the anger and she says, but she comes in like a tornado and she wrecked your life. It's like, there we go again. It's done. There's no work here. It's very interesting, if I could just digress for a moment. Early on, when I was doing a lot of this online research, I kept hearing over and over again, like, these relationships are impossible to get out of. And if you're with a narcissistic, manipulative person, you cannot change them. They don't change. And I kept saying, like, where did they get this from? We've had techniques and tools probably since like 1932, maybe even 1920s, in terms of how to work with more severely disturbed people successfully. Where do they get this? But I think now, and please, if you're finding different research, send it over to me, please. I want to look at more of these examples. So if you have examples of this, I love to hear them. But now I'm beginning to understand why they say these individuals don't change. It's like, look at these tools and techniques. Look at these treatment approaches. These are not serious treatment approaches. And in my mind, it's like it's no wonder these people don't change. Oh, but let me get into this. I'm going to just read one more thing to you, and then we'll wrap up this case, okay? So this online expert says, if it happened once, the chances are it will happen again. It's really strange how these things happen. And my response to that, it's not strange. Of course, if it happened once, it's going to happen again. In my earlier video, I mentioned the repetition compulsion, the adhesiveness of the libido. Of course it's going to happen again. This is not so strange. I don't know why this woman and so many people out there are so puzzled. It will happen again if there's no insight, if there's no understanding, if there's no thoughtful process, if there's no increase in capacity to look at things from different perspectives. Also, you sent her this message, right? This is looking at it from a different perspective, right? So you sent her a message and you said, you look good. What was that all about, right? Now you're opening up somebody's mind. Or, oh, so the relationship was over and you sent her a letter? What was going on there? Did it cross your mind that perhaps she was living her own life? This stuff isn't pleasant to hear, but you need to shift something up. I mean, hopefully you say it in a very tactful, and timing is very important. That's why I mentioned in the prior video to strike when the iron is cold. But this is the way we begin to shake things up a little bit at a time so that we can break the repetition compulsion, so that we can help you not continue to return to these types of abusive relationships. Look, anyway, as always, there's so much more to say. Inevitably, I probably said something that confused or upset you. If I did, shoot me an email. I'm really happy. I love getting these emails, by the way, and listening to these stories. they really help they help me organize future material. If you want to shoot me an email, I'll probably respond back, but I can also address it in a later video. But in any matter, until next time, engage your mind. And that's what I hopefully helped you do today. Just sort of open up your way of thinking about this. Okay, bye for now.